I guess whoever said the phrase, "chaos always wins," was right. The hunger for some extra income to cover some debts led me to take a part-time job at a McDonald's, just a few blocks from my house. During the day, I had a job as an editor at a publishing house and left just in time for my night shift at the fast food place. Neither place had any objection to me working two jobs, so as long as I was willing to work without complaint, they were willing to hire me. I convinced the manager at McDonald's to assign me to the night shift permanently, and it was no problem for him, fortunately. My routine was always the same. Wake up every morning, cook, get ready for the day, and get to the publisher by 8 a.m. And once the clock struck 5 p.m., I would run out and find my way to the fast food place. After closing at 10 p.m., I would walk the few blocks that came before the condo where I lived. The sad part, however, was how tired I was every night after each one. Of course, it wasn't easy for a person to spend more than 12 hours away from home every day. But if things went well, I hoped to make enough money to cover my debt within 2 years and then take a break. But that drive didn't make up for the stress that overwhelmed me from time to time. I remember I used to love going to McDonald's and junk food joints in general. But after working every night watching a bunch of burger and fries orders come and go, this taste was ruined for me, but I digress. This happened one night after closing, when I was on my way home. When I was 2 blocks from getting to my neighborhood, I heard footsteps behind me. They were quiet and subtle, almost as if the person didn't want me to notice them. I didn't look back for a while, but when the perfect mix of the silent footsteps and the darkness became present in an alley, I started to feel scared, so I decided to turn around to see who was coming behind me. As I did so, the person behind me, who was approximately 5 or 6 meters away, started to run, crossed the curb, and turned the corner. At that point, obviously without thinking, I started running after him to try to catch up and see who it was. I approached the end of the block but couldn't get anywhere near it, so I turned around and chose to go home another way. However, every now and then I would nervously turn around to make sure no one was following me. I really hated the fear that little encounter planted in me. That night when I got home, I double-checked my locks and closed all the windows. Even the windows in my bedroom, which was at the top of the house, curled up in bed, afraid and praying that what happened earlier was nothing more than a bad joke by one of my friends. But the truth is that deep down, a part of me was sure that wasn't the case. The muffled sleep must have erased the memory of the previous night's scare, because when I woke up the next morning, I had completely forgotten about the chase and the mysterious stalker. So I followed my usual routine and got ready for work at 8 a.m. I was distracted working at my desk at the publishing house a few minutes after 5 p.m. When I looked up at the wall clock and realized that I was running late for my next shift, I immediately put what I was doing on hold for the next day, shut down my computer, grabbed my stuff, and rushed off to the restaurant. I arrived at McDonald's for my night shift a little late that day, and as I walked through the door, the manager looked at me with a raised eyebrow. I gave him an apologetic nod and immediately began my work. I didn't expect anything strange that night, and up to that point, everything was going the same as usual, just like any other workday. Customers were coming and going, but around 8 p.m., almost 3 hours after I arrived, I noticed a seat that was still occupied by the same person from several hours ago. In fact, I was almost sure I had seen that same man sitting there when I arrived. I brought it to the attention of one of my companions, and he agreed that the man occupying the seat had been there even long before I arrived. This piqued my interest not because he looked forlorn and out of sorts, but because every time I turned to look at the man, he looked away, as if he had been studying me the whole time. At that moment, I remembered a tactic I had seen in a YouTube video. It was a kind of psychological trick that consisted in yawning and waiting to see if the other person yawned too. If he did it, is because that person is watching you. This is because yawning is contagious. It is one of those curiosities of the human brain. The thing is that I did it, and it worked. I pretended to be yawning, and when I turned to look at the man, although he turned his head away immediately, I noticed that he also yawned, so I realized that my suspicions were true. This guy had been watching me for a while, or maybe since I arrived. I decided to do something about the whole strange situation and inform my manager, but since we were close to closing time, he lazily concluded that the man would leave after the store closed and that he wouldn't hurt anyone. To be honest, on the call it sounded like he didn't want to be bothered with whatever he was doing that night, so I let it go. True to what my manager said, once closing time came, the man left without being asked, although he didn't ask for anything either. That must have been a big red flag for me, but I didn't even stop to think about it, so I closed up shop, made sure everything was in order, and started my journey home. Being honest, I wouldn't have remembered what happened to me last night, not if it hadn't happened to me again. I wasn't far away when I heard the same footsteps behind me, slow and subtle, as if the person wanted, and at the same time didn't want to be noticed. I turned more sharply than the night before and didn't wait for the guy to run, but ran in his direction in the dark. But then a person ran into my path, and that gave the guy the advantage, who rushed out in front of me. In the end, I didn't catch up with him that night either. I really hated how fatigue had reduced me to the weakest version of myself. If it was any other day, or a day when I hadn't had to work all day, I would have caught the guy, but at least I was glad I realized something. The person wasn't young, and they always ran in a zigzag. The next day, when I arrived at McDonald's, I was surprised to see the man who had lingered the day before at the same place again. Perhaps, if he didn't bother the customers with his unmannerly eyes and drooling, I would have left him. But that day there were so many complaints about him that he had to be asked to leave the place, but he stubbornly refused, so I was forced to alert my male companions about the man refusing to move. My companions tried to persuade him, but he continued with his obtuse behavior. I saw the frustration in everyone's eyes, so I decided to lend a hand in the matter. I once volunteered at a refugee camp, so I had some knowledge about handling weirdos. I finally approached the table and talked to the man, and as soon as I did, he reasoned with me and agreed to leave on one condition. "Please escort me out," he said. I nodded and followed the man as he walked out of the building. A terrible mistake on my part. I shouldn't have let my guard down, but how was I to know he had a knife with him? We had barely set foot outside, he suddenly pulled his hand out of his coat, and before I could even react, he plunged the sharp weapon into my stomach twice without mercy. Feeling the stabbing pain, I screamed and then fell to the ground. My coworkers approached me as I watched the man flee the site running in a zigzag pattern. I should have known, or at least suspected, that he was the stalker. I don't know how I was so careless as to not have thought of that. Perhaps the state of physical and mental exhaustion I was constantly in due to my double workday had something to do with the fact that my mind was not sharp enough to notice the similarity between this man and the one who followed me at night on my way home. Blood gushed through my stomach like an open faucet, and I wished with all my might that it wasn't as bad as I thought, and that I wasn't dying. But my eyes began to close, and even though I clung tightly to consciousness, my body finally succumbed and my senses shut down. Fortunately, I reopened my eyes a few hours later. The detective standing guard beside me said that my surgery had been a success, and I would soon be released from the hospital. I was in extreme pain at the time, but at least I was thankful that I didn't end up dead, or worse, alive and disabled. I asked about the man who attacked me, and the detective assured me that he had been caught and arrested. The detective also said that the man confessed to stabbing me, but he didn't say the reason, or even make up any excuse to justify what he did. Instead, he coldly and blatantly stated that he just wanted to try out the new knife he had bought, and felt that I was the perfect prey for that. Hearing this, I felt a strange mixture of anger and fear that I had never experienced before. I told the police about the stalking, and the evidence let me know that the man was the same. The officer took my statement and assured me that the man would pay for his crime. I thanked him for his efforts and really hoped he would. 2 weeks later, I was discharged. I still did not quit my job at McDonald's, although I worked under constant fear. In fact, I was working there, and on the same shift, for over a year after the incident. My husband, Nestor, and I were spending Saturday night at home together. It was just a normal night, I thought. We had both had a hard week of work, and that day we just wanted to rest and spend some time together. Just watch some Netflix and eat the leftovers left in the fridge from the week, so we were sitting and talking about I don't remember what in our living room, when in the middle of our conversation, Nestor's cell phone rang. He answered, talked to whoever was on the other end of the line for a while, and then listened quietly. After that, he said one word, "Okay," and without even looking at me, put on his shoes and ran out of the house. I was a little puzzled, but I figured he would come back in a few moments and explain what was going on, but he never did. I waited on the couch for about 30 minutes before trying to call him, but he didn't answer. After an hour, I was extremely confused and scared. In all our years of marriage, Nestor had never done anything like this before. Finally, I called 911 and explained what was happening to my husband. The dispatcher listened to my story and told me there was nothing she could do. She told me to wait in the house until he returned, and if he hadn't returned by morning, then if I should call again. At that point, I started to panic, but I tried to calm down. I needed a simple explanation as to why my husband would just leave without saying where and for so long. I still couldn't help but worry, but I tried to stay calm and think positive so I wouldn't collapse. I went to the kitchen, made myself some chamomile tea, and after drinking it, I went to sleep. But as you can imagine, I couldn't sleep a wink. In the middle of the night, my phone rang. I quickly grabbed it and saw that it was Nestor. Instantly, I was filled with relief and quickly answered. But the voice on the other end was not Nestor's. It was another man's voice. But it sounded fake, as if the caller was using some voice modifier. "Do you want to see your husband again?" the man asked. "Who are you?" I asked back, starting to panic. The man did not answer, but instead gave me directions. The guy said Nestor was in the woods behind his house, explained that he was safe, but that he needed me to go look for him. He told me exactly where I should look, and I tried one more time to ask who he was, but the guy just said, "Be quick, you have 20 minutes and don't involve the police or Nestor will be sorry," then hung up. I ran out of the house and followed the man's instructions to the letter, making my way through the dark, twisted trees. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I didn't even bring my phone with me. I'm terrible at acting under pressure, and I had never felt more pressured than during that night. I ran through the darkness, looking around frantically to see if anyone was hiding behind the trees, but all was extremely quiet. Finally, I saw a clearing up ahead and thought that this was where I would find Nestor, and that the nightmare would finally end, but in reality, this was where it began. As I was about to enter the dead clearing, my foot sank into the ground. I stepped on a tarp covered with dead grass. Then I crouched down and realized that someone had dug a very deep hole in the ground and covered it with a tarp. It was obviously a trap, and whoever had brought me here wanted me to fall into it. But fortunately for me, for some reason, the trap failed. I stepped back, careful not to get too close to the hole, and hid behind a tree. This was the moment I realized I didn't have my phone with me, and I cursed for that. I looked around, but everything was silent and still. For a long moment, I didn't know what to do. That's when I saw a big rock next to me. I grabbed it and threw it towards the trap, and it landed in the center of the tarp and then sank into the hole with a loud thud. At that point, I screamed very loudly as if I was in a lot of pain and waited to see what would happen. A couple of minutes later, I saw someone come out of the darkness, but to my surprise, it was Nestor. At that moment, my heart dropped to the floor. This meant that whoever was behind it all was him, Nestor himself. He must have been the one who dug the hole and set this trap for me. He must have been the one who planned it all, but why? It didn't make sense. Nestor stood on the edge of the hole and looked down, looking for me at the bottom of the hole. Obviously, he saw nothing. That's when I jumped out of my hiding place and pushed him from behind. He gasped in surprise and then fell straight down the hole. I heard a horrible crack when he landed. I was sure something broke, so I walked over and stood right on the edge, and from there I looked down. "What are you trying to do?" I asked, feeling terribly betrayed. Then Nestor started crying. We were married for 6 years and I had never seen him cry before. It was horrible. He didn't even wipe his face. He just let the tears fall like a waterfall. Nestor said it wasn't his idea, that someone was making him do this, and if I didn't let it out, it would be killing him. But I was too angry and confused to believe anything he said. I demanded that he tell me everything, but he only cried harder and begged me to let him off. He said he would explain everything to me once we were safely inside the house, but I simply couldn't do that, because I lost all my trust in him and feared he might hurt me. So instead of doing as he asked, I ran back home, leaving him alone at the bottom of the hole. Once I got home, I reached for my cell phone and called the police. An officer arrived fairly quickly and went back to the woods where Nestor was, but when I got there, the hole was empty. Nestor was gone. 3 months have passed and I still don't know what happened to my husband. The police spent weeks searching around the forest, but apart from the tarp, they couldn't find any trace of Nestor. That same night when I returned home, I logged onto his computer to see if there was any explanation. I looked at his recent emails, but could find nothing. Then I checked his private bank account and saw that someone had transferred thousands of dollars into his account the day before he disappeared. That only left more questions. Who had paid him, and why? Was this some kind of payment for turning me in? After all, the one who was supposed to be in the hole was me. I want to think that Nestor is still out there somewhere, hiding until it's safe to return. But deep down, I know he's gone for good. A few weeks after his disappearance, I started searching the internet for similar cases and asking on forums about possible causes. But the hypotheses were not encouraging at all. In fact, each one was creepier than the other. One of them was that my husband was probably involved with some white slavery or organ trafficking group and that he had probably sold me. And when he didn't get what he expected, these guys took it out on himself. However, that is something I may never know for sure. When I was a kid in the 90s, I used to seriously hate going to school. There was at least one day a month when I woke up and decided in my head that I was staying home. I would do whatever it took, pretend to throw up, hit the toilet, cry, whatever, and most of the time it worked. My parents were working class, all-day laborers, so they couldn't afford to stay home or argue with me and fall behind at work, so when I was in 4th grade, at age 10, they would just let me stay home alone on the days I pretended to be sick. I remember one morning I woke up and I didn't have to fake anything. My stomach was really in knots, my throat was on fire, and I couldn't even hold back my own saliva. For my parents, this had become habitual. Seemingly anything had me throwing up due to my habit of faking being sick to stay home. But while I really was sick this time, I was determined to have a little fun, even at the cost of a little discomfort. So I laid back in the recliner, what I considered a gaming chair, and played some of my favorite video games. The upstairs bathroom was around the corner from my room, down the hall. For no particular reason, this bathroom scared me from the first day we moved into that house. I always believed that ghosts came out there, even though I had no real reason to believe this. Just the fact that, according to my 10-year-old self, I saw things in that place. Somehow I cooked up all those ideas in my head, but the reality was that there was a window high up in the wall that cast strange shadows at the base of the wall. I knew that, but I liked to scare myself and my friends every time they came over. Being home alone that day and needing to pee urgently, I decided I would go downstairs to use the bathroom and then peek in our fridge. But when I got up from my chair, I thought I saw something strange out of the corner of my eye. It looked like the shadow of a large, menacing man in the corner of the hallway, where the window I told you about was. This frightened me, of course, but at the time I was undecided whether it was a ghost or a real person. But I did nothing at once, for I thought that if it was a real person, I would at least hear him walking. I walked cautiously, went into the bathroom, did my business, and then headed to the kitchen. The fridge was right next to our front door, so as I looked inside, I was parallel to the front door knob. Then as I looked inside the fridge looking for a piece of cake, ice cream, or something I could snack on, I heard something strange, a clinking sound. I would immediately go to the door, and exactly what I thought was happening. The front door knob was moving back and forth. It was locked, thank goodness, as my parents were very careful about security, especially when I was home alone. So even the deadbolt was even locked. But still, I knew right away that it wasn't anyone living here. We lived in a pretty good neighborhood in average-sized suburbia, but in my mind, at that moment, anything was possible. Next to the door was a large window, and I saw something moving back and forth beyond the curtain. When I turned to that place, total horror. There was a skinny, ugly old man leaning with his hands on the glass and looking into the house. His eyes went from left to right, then suddenly fell on me, and my heart stopped for an instant. The old man had this big, horrible grin spreading across his hideous face, and he started banging on the glass like he was an animal at the zoo. I remember slamming the fridge so hard I could hear everything moving inside. My adrenaline was at its peak at that moment. I thought my mom was going to kill me when I got home and opened the fridge because of the ooze I was sure to find in it. I remember being more worried about that than the creepy guy looking out the window. Now, as I told you, I was 10 years old when this happened, so I pictured myself as a tall, strapping young man in my head. I was also used to staying home alone and had dealt with many different people coming to our door. Electric and water department workers, gas men, Mormon ladies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and any number of other people prone to knocking on the door. I ran through a mental checklist as I looked this creep up and down. He definitely wasn't here to see my mom or dad, and he definitely didn't fit any of the profiles I just mentioned. He wasn't even knocking on the door. I mean, if there's a red flag, this guy was holding it firmly and high in his hand. "Hey, why don't you come open the door?" he said, pointing toward the handle. "I was just here yesterday," he then said. My head starts swimming. What is this guy talking about? What do you mean yesterday? Does he work for my dad? Does he know my older sister? I took a step forward because I was so off guard that he almost caught me for a second. I was about to open the door out of denial, hoping for some kind of rational explanation, but I held back after that first step. I shook my head and thought, "No way, dude." Then he shook his head too, and next he started kicking the siding of the house as hard as if he were a wrestler, when in truth he was a scrawny old man, but his punches were so violent that I felt as if the wall was shaking and I jumped back. The whole kitchen was behind me, and to my right, where the living room began, were the stairs to the bedrooms. On the other side of the kitchen was a small hallway that led back to my parents' bedroom, plus the laundry room, a bathroom, and then the side entrance to the garage. When I remember the garage, this whole plan turns into action in my head, and to this day, I have never had a cleaner, more pragmatic line of thinking as I did that day. It bums me out a bit, to tell you the truth, and I've been told it's because that's the only time my life has really been on the line. Anyway, the thing is, we kept a lot of stuff in the garage, like our camping and outdoor gear, which also included my special cheap paintball gun from Walmart. It was one of those clear gray pump-action guns. It would take the CO2 cylinder at the bottom of the handle and launch a paintball hard enough to break a window, I know from experience. I grabbed it right away, changed the cylinder out of habit because I knew that whoever was out there trying to defile my house had to be annihilated. I pushed a couple of handfuls of paintballs into the hopper, and now I was ready to go into battle. That's when I looked over and saw something else we kept in the garage, a wooden log that had a small axe sticking out of the top. I tucked it into my pajama pants that I was wearing, because it was like a miniature version of a real axe, which was actually about the size of a knife. After I got arsenal ready, I crept down the hallway, and now I could hear the guy playing with the door, so when I look around the corner, he's no longer looking out the window. I ran out as fast as my sick little body would let me, through the kitchen and then up the stairs, landing in my room, where I planned to barricade myself. I was fully prepared to shoot the guy to death if he came up the stairs, and if that didn't deter him, I'd have to use the axe. My plan was foolproof, but something told me to stop. I came up with something better. Instead of my room, I went around the corner and headed for the creepy bathroom down the hall. It was crazy, but something told me this was the best plan, so I stopped and went straight to the bathroom. I opened the window as quietly as I could, as I knew that if I could get through the opening, the ceiling was easy to walk on. This wasn't the first time I had pulled this stunt. I had already snuck onto the ceiling several times this way, so I knew if I crawled I would be able to make it. I executed my plan flawlessly, and when I was on the roof, I spotted the front door and crawled up on my tiptoes, being careful not to stand too high or step too hard. When I peeked out very carefully, I saw that he was still working on the door, but now he had a screwdriver. I couldn't believe he was trying to disassemble the lock. At that point, I took a deep breath, gripped the gun tightly in my hands, and started shouting out combat video game quotes, even the hardest ones I could remember from the games that were out there at the time. Obviously, I also added a series of profanities, and when I started screaming like that, the guy jumped in fright. That moment was glorious for me, seeing this creepy man scared. That brief moment opened up a whole new confidence in me. It was like a rush of courage straight into my veins. Then I started throwing paintballs at him like a city Rambo. Chest, hands, face, throat. I shot him everywhere, black and blue, green. I was literally only 15 or 20 feet away from him, and I had shot that thing 1,000,000 times by that point in my life. So my aim was formidable. If I could hit a dog turd from 50 feet away, a grown man was too easy a target. I'll never forget how he started screaming at the top of his lungs, completely terrified. I think he thought I was really shooting at him, as those old single-pump paintball guns were very loud when they fired. Plus that instantaneous sharp sting he felt probably made him think it was real, at least for a few seconds. The guy started moving around the corners of the porch, trying to protect himself from the shots, and at one point he was out of my sight. But it was probably at that point that he realized they weren't real bullets. Then he pulled himself together and then started shouting threats of all kinds. He was saying them all in a deep, creepy voice that he didn't have before, as he was asking me to open the door to the house. I ran to the other side of the roof, and by God, there he was, lurking in the opposite corner. I don't even need to tell you that I finally let this guy go. But this time I watched him. The guy hopped the fence, walked back to the little creek that separated some houses, rinsed the paint off him, then wandered down the road, and would you believe it? I watched him minutely every step he took. Once he disappeared from my sight, I quickly ran inside the house, obviously without dropping my guns like a good soldier, and grabbed our phone. I wanted to call the police, but I opted to call my mom. She worked much closer and could get home at least a little faster. I told her everything that happened, and she called my dad right away. They both showed up not long after, and it was only when I saw them walk in the door that I finally broke down, as the reality that I was really in danger hit me very hard. Up until then, adrenaline had been in charge of keeping me alert and in a fighting stance, but now, in front of my parents, my body started to cool down, and I felt very overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. And to be honest, this little soldier cried like a baby for quite a while in his mother's lap. But as hard as it is to believe, the story was actually even crazier. In talking to my parents, they told me that someone had been in our house the day before, and they were very intrigued because when they came home from work, they noticed that some things had been moved around the house. They saw that the window was open in their bedroom, some of the books were moved, clothes were also moved, and someone left a cigarette in the bathroom sink. They knew it wasn't us kids. Obviously, none of us smoked. They made sure to lock the doors, but other than that, they really didn't know what to make of it. So they talked to some neighbors and found out that houses had been happening throughout our neighborhood in the last few weeks. 2 or 3 houses had already been burglarized, and a 4th house that was on its own. But it was learned that over a dozen had been investigated and appraised and then burglarized, including ours. He had a particular modus operandi. He would arrive at a house, assess it from the outside, and look inside to locate where the valuables were and what the best access points were, then stalk the owners to learn their routines and then return, just as everyone was leaving, and take what he wanted. I always wondered what would have happened if this guy had actually entered the house and found me inside. As you can imagine, I have cameras everywhere in my house and a formidable security system, also a big .357 revolver instead of that paintball gun, and all thanks to that weirdo from my childhood. When I moved overseas, I couldn't call my mom, so I convinced her to download WhatsApp so we could message each other whenever we wanted. She wasn't very tech-savvy, so I had to help her set everything up before I left. I had to explain things to her over and over again before she was comfortable with the app. Soon after, I flew to my new place in Italy and sent Mom a text message telling her I had arrived. She responded with a heart emoticon. From then on, Mom and I were constantly texting each other. It was strange, but even though we were on the other side of the world, I felt closer to her than ever. We talked more on WhatsApp than ever when we lived in the same city. I told her all about my new job and my new house, and she told me about all the crazy things going on at home. She told me about her karaoke night and the date she went on, and her new yoga class. She sounded like a complete teenager. I guess she was waiting for me to finally move out of the house before she started having a social life of her own. I was so proud of her, and also proud of myself for my new accomplishments. About 3 weeks after I moved in, Mom sent me a very strange message. "Do you know someone named Joe?" It was a very common name, but I couldn't think of any specific Joe that I was close to, so I told her no. She explained that she had made a new friend on WhatsApp named Joe, who said he was one of my friends from college. She said he seemed really nice and was a good guy, and then my heart sank. I asked him if he had a picture of this person, and he sent me a picture of a very handsome blonde man. I had never seen him before in my life. I instantly did a reverse Google image search, and sure enough, the photo was made by AI. Joe was not a real person, just as I suspected. I tried to call Mom to explain everything directly, but she didn't answer. She texted me that she didn't know how to receive calls on WhatsApp even though I had already shown her how, so I just texted back explaining that Joe was a scammer and that I should block him. Her response was, "I don't know how to block people and I don't think he's a scammer, he seems really nice." My mom is an amazing person, but I was always worried that she would fall for some internet scam because she is overly trusting, and her lack of computer skills made her particularly vulnerable to these types of situations. I kept trying to warn her about Joe, but she wouldn't listen until I finally gave up and sent a message to my cousins asking them to visit Mom and try to reason with her. They said they would, but then I never heard anything more. The next day, Mom sent me a message again. This one said that Joe had asked her for some money to help with the hospital bills where she had confined her poor mother, who was suffering from a very serious illness. I told her once again to stop talking to him, but she said it was too late. She had already sent him $2,000 to support him. I can't tell you how frustrated I was listening to her. It was like talking to a concrete wall. She didn't want to accept for the world that her new friend wasn't one at all, and that he was just a scammer. I called my uncle, who also lived in my hometown, and told him the situation. He said he would go talk to her, but he called me an hour later saying that Mom denied everything, pretending she had no idea what I was talking about. I felt angrier and more frustrated than ever. It seemed like there was nothing I could do to save Mom from this scammer. She wouldn't listen to me and denied everything in my uncle's face. I just hoped the guy would leave her alone now that he got his money out of her. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. Mom texted me in the middle of the night saying she was going to visit Joe at the hospital where he was staying overnight to be in her mother's care now that she had undergone surgery. "Don't go," I texted her in all caps. She didn't respond after that, but then an hour after I went back to sleep, she texted me again. He wasn't at the hospital, and added a sad face emoji. "Because he's not real, Mom," I told her. I hoped this would finally knock some sense into her, but she replied that it wasn't, because he texted back and assured her that he had to go out emergency shopping for his mother's care. I was so frustrated at that point I simply turned my phone off. If Mom was going to allow herself to continue to be scammed, then I was simply going to stay out of it, because nothing I could say would change her mind. I didn't hear from her for the next few days. I was worried, but I asked my cousins to visit her and they told me Mom was fine. She was at home watching TV. That made me feel at least a little better. The next night, Mom finally texted me again. "I haven't heard from you, is everything okay?" I told her I was fine, but didn't mention Joe. Then she wrote, "Well, I'm finally meeting Joe tomorrow. I'll take pictures when I see him to prove he's real." I told her not to go, begged her, wrote a long emotional message explaining how much he meant to me and how she was putting herself in danger by continuing to deal with this miscreant. But she didn't even respond. The next day was the start of my vacation for my new job, and there was some sort of festival in Italy. I planned to spend the week exploring my new city, but with my mother acting like a naive 15-year-old, I knew I had to fly back home and finally arranged to fly back to my country and try to save my mother from her own immaturity. Paradoxical, isn't it? I got the first available flight, which was surprisingly cheap because it was last minute, and finally flew all the way back to the US. The whole flight, I was furious that I had to sacrifice my own vacation to save my mom from her own irresponsibility. The plane landed in the afternoon, and I texted my mom to see where she was. She sent me an address, and I texted, "Is this where you're meeting Joe?" "Yes," she texted back. I texted again, "I'm on my way there. I'll come get you to take you home." She didn't respond. I ordered an Uber at the airport and gave her the address. We drove for half an hour until we ended up at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, which looked like the sketchiest place ever. I asked the Uber driver to wait there, and then ran out of the car to find Mom. I saw a black van parked in the back, but I didn't see Mom's car, so I texted her asking if she was still there. Instantly, I got a reply. "I have your mother. If you give me $10,000, I'll let her go." I almost fainted. I swear to God, I don't know how I could stand up. I started looking in all directions and saw no one outside, so I had to go into the warehouse, but before I did, I took a very deep breath to calm my nerves because I felt like I was about to have a panic attack. After that microscopic pause, I ran inside. As I entered, a man was waiting for me. "Just in time," he said, and grabbed my arms very tightly. As he held me, 3 other men stepped out of the shadows and took my phone and wallet. I demanded to know where my mom was, but the man just laughed. "How am I supposed to know when you've been talking to me the whole time?" At first I didn't understand, and then, when the men started tying me up, I realized the terrible mistake I had been making all along. The WhatsApp messages were not from my mom. They had all been a scammer posing as my mom and somehow using her number to manipulate me, to the point of forcing me to come. I thought they were scamming my mom, but in reality I was the one being scammed. I felt so stupid at that moment, and the worst part is that now I had no idea what they were going to do to me. At that moment, the Uber driver started honking his horn over and over again outside the store, and all the men froze. "Did you bring anyone with you?" the ringleader asked me. "Yes," I said, "and if you don't let me go, he will stop you." One of the men looked through the dusty warehouse window and said, "It looks like the guy is walking away." I felt like screaming, but I couldn't because they stuffed a dirty rag in my mouth. They kept me tied up and stole everything I had, then used my phone to empty my bank account, and after that, they chloroformed me to sleep. When I woke up, I was no longer tied up, but all my things were gone. I walked back to the road and hitchhiked all the way back to my mom's house. She was surprised to see me arrive, and especially in that condition. I told her what had happened, and she said, "See, that's why I didn't want to use WhatsApp. There are too many scammers." I'm retired now, but I worked as an inspector for both private companies and the county throughout my career. Once, a private home builder asked me to inspect a house in the middle of construction, and then they would send my inspection to the county. I got to the right place, walked in, and started doing my job, wandering around with a clipboard and a flashlight. Everything is pretty routine, until I got to the back of the house, where I could hear some strange noises. Looking around, there seemed to be garbage strewn about in some of the rooms, and suddenly I heard a buzzing sound, like a radio or something. Then it dawned on me. There's probably a contractor here, someone finishing drywall or something. With that in mind, I peek into the master bedroom, and inside I see a woman. But this one didn't look at all like a construction worker or someone that has to do with real estate at all. This woman was very dirty, disheveled, and she was around 30 or 35. Maybe she was repairing something and was an extremely sloppy worker. Or what do I know? I don't like to judge people right off the bat. "Excuse me, are you supposed to be in here?" I asked, hoping I was wrong and it did have something to do with housework or something like that. "Of course I do. I'm the owner's wife. What are you doing in my house?" she replied. This response surprised me significantly. I was expecting anything, but not that. I'm the home inspector. I scheduled with your husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough." "I guess I didn't realize anyone would be here," I said. She grumbled and gave me some kind of answer. Then she disappeared into the bathroom area. Not all of the drywall was up, so I could still see her feet and arms as she crawled around making these strange noises. At this point, I started to freak out and was ready to get out of there. This was long before the pocket cell phone, so I was alone out there and couldn't communicate with anyone, at least until I could get to some public phone box, which at that time were plentiful all over town. But in that particular location there were none, so I set out to get back to my car. But before I could retreat, the woman came back from the bathroom with the biggest kitchen knife I've ever seen in my life and planted it through a piece of hanging drywall. At that point, I took a step back out of pure instinct and asked her what the hell she was doing, although what came out of my mouth sounded something like, What are you doing?" She replied in an angry tone. "I don't have a husband, so I think you need to leave," she said. I looked around the floor and all I could see was a pile of garbage, food wrappers, toilet paper tissues, empty bottles. This lady was crazy, and just as I first suspected, she was homeless and had just moved in. From the looks of it, she had been sleeping there for at least a couple of days without anything disturbing her. Now the only thing disturbing her was me, and I was stuck there with her. "Okay," I said without hesitation, making simple logic prevail. "It's time for me to go." I left my clipboard on a shelf and checked my pockets for my car keys, and started up toward the exit. "Don't leave your photos here, they'll want them back at the station," she says, pointing to my clipboard. I shake my head and hold up my hands to show them empty and keep moving backwards. She doesn't like this. She starts breathing weird, like super loud and deep. I took my own deep breath and grabbed that clipboard again, anything to lighten the woman's mood, but this triggered her even worse somehow. This lady started screaming like some kind of demonic spirit and started running towards me, and I almost fell backwards from fright. I took off running, trying to get away, only to stumble head-on into a slightly older, shirtless, tattoo-covered guy who came out of anywhere. I had no idea. He was definitely a junkie. "You woke me up," he said angrily. "You shouldn't be here. Why did you wake me up?" I tried to respond, but what the hell was I going to tell this guy? His look alone told me he wasn't willing to reason with anyone, so I wasn't going to talk to him. Then the woman came back down the hall, and between the two of them, she had me cornered. "This guy says my husband sent him," the woman said to the tattooed guy. Long story short, she threw me right under the bus. Then the guy started losing his mind, started breathing heavily as if he was filling with rage and contorting himself in a weird way. Then he started asking me in an aggressive manner about how the woman's husband could find them where they were. It didn't take me long to realize that I was dealing with a person under the influence of substances. The man's eyes were moving from side to side, and I could tell he was having some sort of paranoid attack. But the scary thing about it was that I was his target. I assured them that I didn't know the guy, had nothing to do with it, that I was just there to simply look at the house. But I made a mistake and got the wrong address, and assured them that I would leave without any more trouble and they would never see me again. Apparently, at least from what I surmised, they were running from this lady's husband. And from the little conversation they had afterwards, I realized that this was a drug dealer they owed. They were going out of town on foot and saw the partial construction on their own, so this became their lair for at least about 48 hours. I tried to convince them in every way I could that I had nothing to do with this dealer they owed, but no matter what I said, they were simply more than convinced that I was a henchman for the woman's husband, that I had found them, and now this man wanted to take care of me in true street style. This, without a doubt, was by far the most terrifying confrontation I could have in my life. Firstly, because I was totally unprepared to face not one, but two crazies in full delirium. They started to approach slowly, in a very scary way, he showing his muscles and she still with the huge knife in her hand. But as they approached, it occurred to me that the only ace up my sleeve was the information they themselves had provided me with. So I made up a last-minute lie, not knowing if it was really going to work. But I had to try because my life was at stake, literally, and fortunately it worked. I told the woman, "Your husband is not going to like any of this. You know he is out, right?" Before she could complete the sentence, both jaws immediately hit the floor and then ran to the window to do what junkies do, sniff through the blinds, look in all directions like a true madman, and corroborate if the mobster was really outside. Seeing that they were too distracted, trying to locate the man who probably wanted to hunt them down, I proceeded to back slowly through the house until I made good distance. When I was sure I had a considerable head start, I ran as fast as I could to get back to my car. I was horrified when I looked back to find them chasing me across the front yard. They were much paler and thinner than they looked to me inside the house. In the sunlight, they were even creepier because of their appearance, looking like a couple of zombies or something. I dropped my keys in the dirt before I could unlock my car, but I quickly bent down to grab them and started running again. As soon as I got to my car, I immediately opened the door, got in, started it up in a split second, pushed the gas pedal to the floor, and pretty much didn't let go until I saw the parking lot of my building in front of me. As soon as I arrived, I called the owner of the building and notified him about the situation, and directly told him that I didn't want to work on the property inspection because I really had no intention of ever setting foot on that site again. Last I heard, these people had fled the site, and the owner was finally able to carry out the project he had for the property. But honestly, I don't regret doing without that particular job at all.